So very good evening, everyone. On behalf of National Law School Bangalore, as well as German Consulate in Bangalore, we would like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you to this discussion on AI and human rights. The relevance of this discussion, I don't think need any elaboration for an audience like this. We all realize that AI is making inroads into so many different aspects of our life, in some ways positively, but in many ways negatively also. Um, on the positive side, yes, AI is making our life maybe better, easier on different dimensions. But on the negative side, we can also realize that AI is challenging many of our long cherished human rights. So for today's discussion, we are going to do this in two parts. So the first part is a keynote lecture from Professor Anupam Chander, and that will be followed by a panel discussion which will be moderated by Professor Sudhir Krishnaswamy. And the other panelists in that panel discussion are Ms. Anita Gurumurthy and Mr. Siddharth Das. Before I invite Professor Chander for his keynote talk, maybe I should also mention a couple of words about him. So Professor Anupam Chander, as many of you might be knowing, is one of the leading academicians dealing with the regulation of new technologies. He is currently the Scott K. Ginsburg Professor of Law and Technology at the Georgetown University Law Center. And as most of you might be aware of, he has contributed many excellent works, including the book titled The Electronic Silk Road. He has also published many articles which have made huge impact in different areas. For example, I am a teacher working in the area of intellectual property law, and I cannot have a course on intellectual property rights without referring to one of his seminal works called The Romance of Public Domain, which actually demystified many aspects of traditional knowledge protection. Similarly, if you're working in the area of data regulation, yes, data nationalism is one of the seminal papers, again coming from him. Similarly, if you look at the specific context of AI, again, you will notice that he had written an article in Michigan Law Review called Racist Algorithm, wherein he asks very, I would say, critical or provoking question like, what is the best alternative to AI decision making? Is the black box of human mind a better alternative? So through those kind of provocative questions, yes, he has been influencing the policy discussions at the global level, and I'm sure that today's keynote talk will also be raising many thought-provoking questions. So with these minimal words, I would like to invite Professor Chander for his keynote address. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Arul. And thank you so much, Professor Sen and Anushka and the German Consulate for your generous sponsorship for this event and this incredible series of talks. So I'm going to try to provoke, as I normally do, and so that's going to be part of my plan this evening. So the framing of the talk is where is the global South in AI in the AI futures? So let's begin by talking about how the great economic powers of the world as they stand today are viewing the AI technologies. Let's begin with this statement. In the United States in 2019, America has long been the global leader in this new era of AI and is poised to maintain this leadership going forward because of our strong innovation system. And Donald Trump would go on to issue an executive order titled Maintaining American Leadership in AI. That executive order declares continued American leadership in AI is of paramount importance to maintaining the economic and national security of the US and to shaping the global evolution of AI in a manner consistent with our nation's values, policies, and priorities. China's ambitions are also grand. By 2030, China's AI theories, technologies, and applications should achieve world-leading levels, making China the world's primary AI innovation center and laying the important foundation for becoming a leading innovation-style nation and an economic power. And in the EU, the European Commission declares, with each new wave of data, it represents major opportunities for the EU to become a world leader in the area in its Data Strategy 2020. And the EU Commission has announced the new rules and actions aiming to turn Europe into the global hub for trustworthy AI. The Commission has also sought, however, to temper expectations somewhat. It hopes to achieve the share of the digital economy proportionate to its economic weight more generally. The EU should create an attractive policy environment, it says, the Commission says, so that by 2030, the EU's share of the data economy, data stored, processed, and put to valuable use in Europe, at least corresponds to its economic weight, not by fiat, but by choice. A European strategy for data that not by fiat, but by choice is not because of protectionist moves, which I think is an important caveat to this statement. So where in those visions of the future is the global south, or as some accurately describe, the majority world? Will the global south come last in the AI technology race? And should we even think about this as an AI technology race? And that's when I'm going to try to challenge a little bit in my remarks. The worry is that the rest of the world gets left behind in some way. This is important because there are clear economic issues at stake. The distribution of AI technology, creators, and the distribution of AI use have economic implications. And also, there is, of course, the human impact of AI, which is, of course, the focal point of this series. The human rights when confronted with artificial intelligence. Many countries, including India, have cited, of course, another concern, which is national security implicated by AI. Though I'm not going to focus on that in my remarks this evening, though I'm happy to talk about that in the conversation. So let me begin by asking the question, must the AI be domestic? Because in these visions that we see, the Make in China 2030 or Made in China 2030, or the Made in America vision that you just saw from President Biden, there is this effort to domesticate AI. Must AI be domestic for it to benefit the economy? The famous 2019 Digital Economy Report from UNCTAD seems to suggest this. The extent to which entrepreneurship in developing countries translates into real benefits depends to a large extent on the ability of entrepreneurs to develop the underlying digital technology domestically. That seems to be a foundation of UNCTAD's view on this topic. But it's not clear to me that entrepreneurs must develop all digital technologies domestically in order for the country itself to benefit. Imagine if Indian startups were prohibited from accessing or contributing to GitHub because it is now owned by Microsoft, another big tech player. Indeed, denying foreign nations access to advanced technologies produced by one's companies is a hallmark of something we call economic sanctions. So in some sense, requiring domestication is a kind of economic sanction placed upon oneself. It makes sense for a startup to build using the best and cheapest tools available, whether they are found locally or from abroad. It makes sense for an SME to use the best customer management or human resources systems or other systems it needs, whether they are from home or abroad. The concern that one is merely a consumer, not the producer of technology, is echoed across the world. This is not just a concern of UNCTAD. Even the European Union worries that without extensive public investments in the private sector development of AI, the EU risks losing out on the opportunities offered by AI and being a consumer of solutions developed elsewhere. So this worry about being a consumer, not a producer, seems to be quite broad. Now, there's nothing wrong with the government seeking to promote local platforms, local digital infrastructure. I think that is creditable. But protectionist barriers that require the use of local companies are likely to leave the companies that must build atop of digital infrastructure worse off. Protectionism benefits the protected, but not those who rely upon those goods or services. Some worry that foreign companies are creating incubators and research arms in the global south, that it's their interests that are at stake. Google's AI labs in Bangalore and Accra, or IBM's research center in Brazil, for example. But I believe government should be encouraging such actions. Yes, such efforts are clearly designed to make those companies' architectures more valuable by establishing vigorous ecosystems around those architectures. But those efforts also provide seed capital, technological infrastructure, and technical resources that are often unavailable otherwise. Now, one of the concerns that's often raised is the concept of data or digital colonialism. Interestingly, worries about being left behind in the global tech race, as I've mentioned, are heard even in the industrial powerhouse of Europe. The European Union echoes the worries of the UNCTAD report in some respects, but in some respects with even more alarm. One report on AI in a digital age for the European Parliament points out the risk of European values being globally replaced, are companies becoming marginalized, and our living standards being drastically reduced. Indeed, the language of colonialism is offered. If the EU does not act swiftly and courageously, it will end up becoming a digital colony of China, the US, and other states. So this is from a draft report. Emerging technologies could lead to a global power shift from the Western world. Here I suspect that the authors have in mind the rise of Chinese AI technology in particular. So I think data colonialism is a very serious issue. After all, one of the keys to colonialism was the combination of captive suppliers of commodities and captive markets for processed goods. Do nations in the global south now simply become suppliers of data and consumers of foreign AI, captive sources for data and captive markets for processed data? So on one level, this metaphor tracks. People in the global south are now captive markets for data and, to some extent, captive markets for AI. But this analysis can also conflate the technology with the services that are built on top of it. The AI is doing something. It is in service of something. And that's a point that I want to come back to again later in my remarks. Many of the AI systems are in fact inputs into other services or even today, goods. Allowing companies to access foreign AI can actually enable them to utilize the most advanced technology possible and to provide higher value-added services. So UNCTAD worries that developing nations risk losing the ability to develop indigenous innovation ecosystems. I should note that some of these quotes were from a draft report. That was a 2021 draft. The 2022 version drops the last two lines entirely and revises the first one dramatically. And I use the draft report because it does suggest some concerns of those issues that obviously didn't win the majority approval ultimately, but are still interesting to see. So the first quote is replaced with the final version at the right, and the second two quotes are dropped from the final version that is approved by the Parliament. Okay. But there's yet another concern that I have about data colonialism. What if the rich countries of the world keep out service providers from the global south on various policy grounds? So here, I'm going to criticize the European Union on this issue. Even after a quarter century of data protection, Europe has found only one country that is low or middle income that qualifies as providing an adequate protection of privacy. That country is Argentina. Now, those watching this space know that Uruguay also has an adequacy ruling, but Uruguay is actually a high-income country according to World Bank classifications. This means that there is now only one non-rich nation that can readily supply 21st century services to Europe. Everyone else can do so through cumbersome and expensive mechanisms that have become much harder post-Schrems II. So I worry about this in an article. So this is the map showing the countries that are adequate. You can see very few countries have an easy way to obtain data, personal data from the European Union. I worry about these issues in an article with Paul Schwartz, forthcoming next month. And of course, the Data Protection and Privacy Act, which has just been the bill that's just been proposed by the government, if it passes, may help India demonstrate that it has adequate protection. It was certainly a necessary step. The EU's new AI Act has another mechanism that will require compliance by foreign providers of AI services if it is enacted, including possible certification. This makes sense. You can't allow foreigners to supply services that don't conform to local law. This is what I call globalization okay. I didn't, okay. So the worry here, just of data colonialism, is where global, and so this is my particular worry here, where nations are really make it impossible for countries outside, especially countries in the developing world, to participate in high-value trade. This is the principle that I call the principle that you have to make sure that even foreign services comply with local law, is what I call globalization, a global service that is modified to conform to the local legal landscape. I think even here, it is important to be watchful because certification systems can be used in a protectionist manner. And so this is something to watch the evolution of. There's another critical issue that must be considered as we engage in international trade in AI, whether the AI system understands the local circumstances. So at the risk of being an ungracious host, ungracious to my hosts, being an ungracious guest, let me begin with the poster for this conference. It recalls, of course, Michelangelo's fresco in the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel with God giving life to Adam, the first man. God is, of course, imagined as a white man. And so who will give life to the first robot, according to the designers of this poster? Still yet a white man. The God of robots is still white. I don't think, of course, that's what the designer was aiming for. The designers, they simply had a task to be done, and they grabbed an image from a stock supply of images. But of course, the stock images themselves are where the issue lies. And soon, stock images will be propagated by AI themselves. So I did a little search for stock images, and this is what you get. So this is how the creation of Adam or the creation of robots is depicted in our understanding today. So the AI, of course, that creates these stock images in the future will be trained on the supply of stock images that are currently in existence, trained on that historical racism, and propagate that racism like a virus, what I call viral discrimination in my essay, The Racist Algorithm, that Arul kindly referred to in the Michigan Law Review. Now, let me offer another example of a geographical. When I first started producing the slideshow, I used Microsoft's AI, and Microsoft's PowerPoint AI is fantastic. I'm a huge fan, okay? But of course, it's going to have these issues as well. So when you ask the Microsoft AI for a picture of a robot, of course, it has this very kind of oddly racialized robot. So I now used an AI system to come up with a better vision of robotics. This is Stable Diffusion, a robot from India. So it's just remarkably, so there is a lot of capacity in AI systems to if we approach them with the understanding of their limitations, with the understanding of our current human predicament, to actually improve the state of affairs. And so that's the way I wanted to imagine these AI futures. But let me offer another example of a geographical mismatch. Volvo is developing a feature Volvo, which is a Swedish car manufacturer, of course, owned by a Chinese car company today, is developing a feature it calls large animal detection. Okay? But when it tried this feature on Australian roads, it realized that the AI didn't recognize kangaroos because they hopped. They didn't move like large animals were supposed to move. So, and I'm stealing this picture from someone else online without credit, so I apologize to the gentleman or gentlelady for not attributing. So Volvo recognized this problem and started training its AI on kangaroos. So this is literally called a kangaroo detection data collection vehicle. Okay, so this is Volvo's effort to understand the local geography. More generally, AI will often need to be culturally or environmentally sensitive, that an AI trained on the behavior of the US population will likely produce erroneous results when applied in China and vice versa. But let me offer a more troubling and tragic cultural error. Not on the part of the AI, but involving an AI nonetheless. The Boeing 737 MAX 8 crash occurred because of an automated system. The automated system malfunctioned, taking over the plane to push it down repeatedly, fighting with the pilots who were trying to keep it up. The AI thought the plane was stalling, and so needed to pick up speed. Boeing, when the crash occurred, because the crash occurred with an Indonesian airline, seems to have assumed that the crash was caused by pilot error rather than its own system, in part because of cultural, possibly at least because of cultural biases, because the captain was from India and the co-pilot was from Indonesia. So this is reporting in Business Week. So too dumb to spell 737 was a frequent refrain among American pilots when talking about foreign pilots, and concerns that this was, of course, their failure to immediately recognize the fault of their own AI system led to, of course, another tragic crash, which finally made them recognize their own complicity in these tragedies. The examples help demonstrate, I'll move on from this picture. Sorry. I can't move on to the picture. It'll be a while till I come to this right here. The examples help demonstrate the importance of having diverse teams that are involved in the creation and management of AI systems. But I want to note, this is not true just of AI systems. It's true of all important systems that impact diverse people. So then the next question is, what should regulation look like? So there are many reasons to want to regulate AI, whether from abroad or from home. What should that regulation do? The EU has proposed a landmark comprehensive approach to AI, the AI Act. Its hope is to regulate AI systems broadly, even spurring a Brussels effect like that in data privacy, where the law caused a de facto or de jure acceptance of its norms outside Europe. Now, in formulating its AI strategy, the European Commission appointed a high-level commission for AI with more than 50 members. The commission included numerous representatives from business and from civil society and business. Included corporations were very diverse. Airbus, which you can see in my last example, uses AI systems, which you may not have known about beforehand. AXA, an insurer. Bayer, a pharmaceutical manufacturer and a chemicals manufacturer. Just to start with the A's and B's of the corporations that were involved. The EU's rules are very much designed to promote and be consistent with a robust European AI industry. The Biden administration has proposed a more voluntary, principles-based AI Bill of Rights to provide a normative framework for AI and to guide government procurement of AI systems. Now, I want to conclude with a couple of provocations. And really, these are questions that I don't myself have answers to. So I turn to the brilliant minds of here in India to help solve these questions. I want to imagine two possible future scenarios. First, imagine it's 2032. This is my Mechanical Turk scenario. It's one of the first cases testing this AI Civil Rights Act of 2025. That law made the use of systems that discriminate on the basis of gender, sexual orientation, or race illegal. Higher Right, a California company, is accused of violating the statute by offering an AI resume evaluation system that provided discriminatory results. Higher Right offered a striking and novel defense. Its systems did not actually depend on AI. You can see now the Mechanical Turk reference. Rather, its vaunted recommendation system was in fact human beings in Indiana, in India, in Philadelphia, and the Philippines. Higher Right's AI was no more than an initial suggestion that its human employees very often overrode. Indeed, in its own internal review of the particular case, Higher Right concluded that it was the humans who introduced the bias. The judge dismissed the AI Civil Rights Act claims, though it allowed other discrimination claims to go forward. This was important to Higher Right because the penalties under the AI Civil Rights Act were up to 6% of its global revenues. And no similar penalties were available under the other civil rights statutes that were available. So the reason I pose this question is, what is the goal in regulating AI? Should we regulate AI qua AI? AI because it's AI or because of a particularized harm? Is it only decisions by AI that need to be explained, unbiased, or accurate? Now, should we approach AI regulation horizontally like the EU? The EU's approach is both horizontal and vertical. It's largely ultimately relying upon sectoral regulation in the particular technologies. And should failures by AI be punished more severely than failures by humans? Now, a second provocation, a second science fiction story. It's 2075. The Ministry for AI has issued a new regulation. The Ministry for AI has authorities over all AI used in the country. Every AI is registered with the ministry, its algorithms and data closely monitored, including with ministry officials working inside the companies. What is this new regulation that the Ministry for AI issues? All AI should promote social harmony, reducing intercommunal strife or political unrest. Okay, so, and I will leave the discussion of that, or I will leave that purely as a provocation. So I want to conclude with a couple remarks. I think we could see the AI race as a zero-sum competition between all the nations of the world. But I think there's a more optimistic possibility that we should strive for, of using the latest computing and AI tools to lift people up across the world, and having access to the latest AI tools from around the world. Financial tools that increase inclusion, opportunities for trade that were previously impossible, and access to the sum of human knowledge, all within a governance mechanism that remembers the human within the AI systems, the humans that are at stake within the AI systems. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Chander, for that very thought-provoking keynote address. As expected, there are so many questions that we need to discuss. And I'm hopeful that at least some of them would be discussed during the panel discussion, which is going to happen now. So may I now invite the panelists for our panel discussion. So first of all, I would like to invite Professor Sudhir Krishnaswamy, who is the Vice Chancellor of National Law School of India University and also the Director of Professional and Continuing Education at National Law School. He is also the co-founder and managing trustee of Center for Law Policy Research, CLPR, and he is also a recent recipient of the very prestigious Infosys Award for Humanities. So, welcome, Professor Krishnan. May I now invite Ms. Anita Gurumurthy, the co-founder and executive director for IT for Change, and she has been one of the most vocal persons with respect to data governance and AI. She is also a member of many of the expert bodies working in this area. May I also now invite Mr. Siddharth Das, who is the CEO and co-founder of Univ.ai, one of the AI learning platforms. And he has also contributed immensely into this area through his association with different fintech organizations. So with this brief introduction, I leave the floor to the prosecution.
Thanks, Arun, and thank you to the audience for showing up and for the patient hearing. So we'll start off this session by inviting our panelists to take 5 or 7 minutes, 8 minutes maybe, to just share their take on what they've heard or build from there in a direction they're choosing. So we'll start with Anita first.
Thanks so much. A privilege to be here. So I work with an organization that works broadly on development, the political economy of development, situated within the data paradigm, so to speak. So we've been around for nearly 15 years looking at digital technologies and what it really means for people-centered development. So some of my thoughts really come from a kind of historical assessment of very, very basic questions about what economic justice actually means. So questions that bothers all of us, questions like who's benefiting, who's setting the rules, some of which was already addressed. I just wanted to say that there are a couple of things that really we need to understand about the AI paradigm, the smartification of life. So one is this entire story of a collaborating organization we work with, which is quite very well known, which is SEWA, which is the Cooperative of Women. SEWA put joined hands with a very leading international e-commerce company a couple of years ago in order to put the products that its women-led cooperatives manufacture on this e-commerce platform. Now, after 1 year, they had not even sold one thing on the platform. And obviously, it has everything to do with the way the algorithms on the platform work, even if we believe that e-commerce marketplaces are level playing fields. The second is the story that which is also something that is thought-provoking, disturbing, which is about the role of smartified farms in the hinterlands of Indonesia, Vietnam, Southeast Asia, Cambodia. And these are all Chinese companies which use liberalization in the economy as a means to avail of contracts. And these contracts allow them to remote manage farms, continuously collecting data, farm data, soil data, farmer practices, traditional knowledge, satellite data, what you will. So the question here for me is not just questions about, whether the AI should technically, whether algorithms should technically reside in certain producer countries and, what is really wrong with somebody being a consumer, because it's quite okay if there are certain firms that are producing and there are others who are consuming. The question really is to be situated in the context of the broader social engineering, the broader ethos of how AI is being deployed in ways that might undermine the self-determination of peoples, nations, groups, collectives, all in the name of equality, equity, opportunity, and a level playing field. So the deployment of digital technologies, is basically protocol power. It's basically standards, right? It's a question of how AI is not just code. AI is really not complex machine learning algorithms alone, but AI is actually understood to be regulatory in nature in two ways. One is it shapes and conditions human behavior, and secondly, it reallocates wealth and resources. So I think we need to tightly hold on to these two truisms. And the way society governs AI is therefore very, very crucial, not only for how it chooses to direct its moral compass, but in doing so, what vision of economic transformation it seeks to pursue. That is because the future of economic development, as has been demonstrated already, hinges on AI capabilities. Of course, the human capabilities, which might be in Silicon Valley or elsewhere in China or wherever, but also the infrastructural capacities for a new industrial paradigm. And this is really not to be reduced to a banal question about, so what if data resides in somebody else's cloud, but to say that if data indeed is a factor of production, then it's, many people who work on land rights and land-related digitalization, working with farmers and Aboriginal communities, have argued that today, because land has gotten digitalized, common property resources, lands that were not necessarily held under property regimes, have been codified in the name of somebody who's powerful in the village, so that data grab becomes akin to land grab. It's very easy. I mean, there are researchers in this very city of Bangalore with respect to how peri-urban areas have really been included into private property regimes for big builders because of databases that were put out in the public domain. So in some sense, what we're talking about is really the high stakes in data that tends to get obscured when we talk about AI, as if code is something, that is geospatially grounded. Whereas in cloud-based environments, AI operates over big data sets that are not static. They are part of cyber flows or electronic transmissions that cross borders effortlessly through platform infrastructures of digital behemoths, monopolies, monoliths, whatever. So in the innovation paradigm, rules are broadly set by these powerful corporations which are doing these smartified agriculture. And the free data flows approach, which is often tied, unfortunately, to trade treaties, so the plurilateral and multilateral trade treaties, oftentimes fold in rules about data flows into trade regimes, which is, of course, the wrong site for negotiating data-related rules. But what really happens is that we are forced to deal with issues such as, well, if you only anonymize the data, it can flow freely because you're guaranteeing somebody's privacy, which is reduced to the idea of anonymity. And, well, anonymized data is deemed to be privacy enhancing. So what is really happening is, for developing countries, this is posing questions, quandaries about distributive integrity. What do you do when rules of data are tied to rules of trade, right? So this is also very, very curious because distinctions between trade and goods and services is breaking down. Just take the example of translations, right? You're sending audio files somewhere, which will get translated in a cloud-based environment into text, and it will come back. There is no book involved, and there is absolutely no CD involved, but there is data involved. And once upon a time, these were trade and goods paradigms. Now they're all trade and services paradigm. So in many ways, the challenges to domestic AI regulation in these environments is enormous. Take the Seva example. If there's a foreign e-commerce company, how do I give preferential treatment to e-commerce for MSMEs on e-commerce platforms, or ensure transparency on digital labor platforms? How do I call to account those algorithms, right? How do I, in that particular question about a biased algorithm and a prejudiced person making a decision about who will be employed, how will I call to account what the algorithm is actually doing in those environments? If it doesn't really if I'm not legitimately the public agency authority who can open it up. So these, I think, lead us to the very, very embedded, intrinsic, inextricable connections between data governance and AI governance. So there are two sides of the coin. And it's really important to understand that we cannot price that open without understanding that today data is really, the social commons of data is governed through trade secrets, through very restrictive intellectual property regimes. And therefore, the AI that's built on top of it is deemed to belong to those who control the data. So this is a kind of a quandary that we're talking about, and I'd recommend that we need 3 axiomatic principles in relation to the governance questions. And these 3, I would submit, are egalitarianism, which is about social equality, federalism, which is about political equality, and distributive integrity, which is about economic equality. And these are really important because I think that what we are looking at is a situation that's quite untenable. According to estimates, by 2030, 45% of expected economic gains in society may be attributable to applying commercial AI technologies to business. This is like a PricewaterhouseCoopers, broad projection, right? If 45% of economic gains in society is going to come from the kind of AI economy, the unfortunate truth about the way we are headed towards this is much of this is, however, in the realm of personalization and recommendation algorithms in the economy of experience. This economy of nudging you to watch certain Netflix films because you've watched certain already, or buy a certain book, or buy certain saris, or whatever, is called intelligent experience. Which is a complete insult to human serendipity and unpredictability. And we have a strange predicament that new technologies in the ad economy focus on a narrow idea of consent that's privacy enhancing. So privacy protection leads to privacy compliant markets. You know that every single behemoth out there today is talking about decentralized AI. So keep your data on your Android phone, but my AI will visit you as if it's giving you the guarantee that your data is yours. We are not touching it, but our AI is ours because we control it. So the entire decentralized AI model is a kind of fobbing off of intellectual property questions by allowing you this mirage of, well, you keep your privacy and anonymity, we keep your AI. So the end goal is not privacy, it's just complete lack of, it's the business of extractivism, and it undercuts self-determination. So consent then, as a human right, becomes a mechanism for an individualist data governance regime, which doesn't serve society, right? It doesn't serve society to be nudged all the time to buy more and more things. So a mechanism for ostensibly protecting individual sovereignty for the frictionless functioning of the data market is certainly not an end towards any form of distributive or democratic integrity. Distributive equality also requires the role of public AI, publicly provisioned, publicly invested, like the European Union, for instance, cloud infrastructures for MSMEs. I would love for women's MSMEs to actually have their own publicly provisioned cloud infrastructure, like the public roads or subsidized water, etc. And the role of data science to benefit the 99%. I have to actually tell you that Google today correlates aggregate health outcomes with non-health outcomes for even a subset of Fitbit users that did not opt out in some use cases. So health outcomes can still be predicted, and ad targeting is still possible for all non-Fitbit users. So even if you opt out of the Fitbit ecosystem, you will be profiled and ads will be sent to you. I think that we really therefore need to relook at how agency, autonomy, and freedoms can be situated in the idea of justice, which brings me to my last point. I think we need to open up and re-examine the relationship between institutional ethics and human rights. So the question there about the human above the loop who was actually cheating you because there were certain prompts from the AI system in the AI Mechanical Turk, it's really not a question of behavioral ethics. It's a question of institutional ethics. So if you were to reduce everything to a question of what an individual is doing vis-a-vis the decisions that an automated system is giving you, we are not going to get very far. So we really have to embrace this tension between human rights and political philosophy, human rights and ethics, and open it up because we have to go back to the drawing board in the contemporary context and look at things. For instance, and I don't have answers, but I do have questions like my previous speaker, during the pandemic, children were reunited in refugee camps with their parents because of facial recognition technologies, right? This doesn't make facial recognition technologies a use case that must be legitimized by the law. But it does raise questions about how do we react to, with panic, without panic, calmly, how do we react to facial recognition technologies? So it's all very fashionable to talk about decolonizing, deracializing AI, but I think the question is towards what? I would like to also underscore what was said. I think this is not about statist imaginaries of economy and development. It is also not about the hegemony of markets. I think we really need to go back to rediscovering democracy where we don't want to be socially engineered. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Anita. Siddharth?
Hello. So I was trying to make some notes here so that I can actually say something that's coherent. It's hard after so much has been said already. So other than being technically trained, long ago and far away, I went to graduate school at MIT. I can't really lay claim to be an AI expert of any kind, except that I gathered a bunch of professors some 4 years ago to create an online institution to offer world-class sort of graduate school level AI education around the world. And the metaphor we chose for that was the Harvard program in data science and AI. And Professor Protopappas, who runs our programs and administers them, actually is the director of the master's program at Harvard, Harvard's data science and AI program. So to the extent hegemony in training is a problem, I am trying to address it, and I'm sure there are many others. And I'm trying to address it. So one of the things that I think that leaps out is one of my responses to doing this in AI was that AI in vernacular is being reduced to being a vocational skill. You can't turn your head these days without looking at some form of AI training or some form of AI in drinking water, whatever that be, right? Whereas I think while recognizing that the practice of AI is perhaps in its very incipient, super early stages, right? When you dig deeper technically into what's going on in the world of AI, most people would know that what's commercially deployed AI is A, B, C, D. We haven't gotten beyond the second letter of the alphabet, right? There's good work going on nonetheless. I think advanced work's pretty good. But what gets passed around as AI is actually very elementary stuff. Nothing that should be scaring anyone, right? But come back to that, I'm personally doing something with AI hegemony. So I'm less terrified by it. And the process of trying to do that obviously has made me learn a bunch about it. And so I think I have what I might call a common man's but enlightened perspective on the matter, right? So with that, I want to make a point that I suddenly noticed. I've been noticing for a while how third world has been neatly replaced with the global south. And it's no less insulting, by the way. Nonetheless true. Yeah. And somehow we need to find new words constantly to say rich white versus poor not so white. And true, I mean, acknowledged. Let's just say black, and white, white. Okay, I mean, be that as it may, just wanted to make a point. So, see, face recognition doesn't work when you want it to. AI. All right. So years ago, I learned that first principle thinking can help unravel much that seems impenetrable and mysterious. And so like an idiot savant, I ignore all that's known and start to chart a thesis on any matter I consider important, right? And so I'll set some ideas out, which I think will help all of us participate in this conversation as equals. So I'll quote, and I forgot to say this, so pardon me for not attributing, that any sufficiently advanced technology will be indistinguishable from magic. I don't know. Who said it? Does anyone know? Arthur C. Clarke. Well, so I think it's relevant. We jump to Boeing 737 MAX. Arthur C. Clarke also wrote a book, as many of you know, that Three Laws of Robotics, right? And one of those cardinal principles is that technology should not be allowed to supersede human beings. And by violating that little thingy, Boeing made a mistake, right? And so wouldn't have happened. So I think, first of all, AI is, as I mentioned, it is so much in its early stages that we need to see AI more as a metaphor for advanced technologies rather than as a thing in itself, right? For example, we aren't really talking about quantum computing, but I think most do not even start to understand what quantum computing could do to the universe. I mean, many of the things that we think are worrisome about AI would be multiplied, quantum-fold if quantum computing were to happen. Or let's say something that we actually understand, like let's say nuclear fusion, and if there were a global divide over possession of energy technologies, right? And I think if it's a question of ownership, I doubt that it's really a problem of AI. I think that problem supersedes AI as a field. And I think, the core issues of discrimination probably are pervasive around anything that's sufficiently advanced. So I think that's important to know and note, right? With AI, somehow I think the risk is a little less than we think it is. And I'll come to that because I think it's later in my notes. So now the big thing, recommendation engines, which seem to be everywhere, right? Prediction of next choice. Let's all understand that it could be all accomplished with something that barely resembles advanced AI, like something called collaborative filtering, which many of us probably here know, right? And therefore, that's not scary technology. And yet, that drives choices, like, for example, in Facebook or any of the other digital platforms that tend to create self-reinforcing echo chambers, right? Big problem there is that all of us like to think we are right. And so if all that we ever see are things that are similar to what we believe in or think, that's the only thing we'll ever know. And I don't think AI alone is, guilty of creating this, though definitely guilty of reinforcing it. I think Fox News started it and continues in most media to this day. Now, suddenly, any of you who've been seeing this Netflix series called, what is this? Inheritance or something like that? It's essentially about Fox News. Succession, right, yeah, Succession. Close enough to Inheritance, right. We'll know that, so there's a line repeated again and again, give people what they want, give people what they want. And that's the exact opposite of what should be happening, right? The whole idea behind quote-unquote civilization is to equip people with the tools and technologies for critical thinking, to decide, to be able to decide for themselves, on their own what's right, wrong, preferable, not preferable. And I think narrowing the sphere of influence of the human mind, driven by the data it's given to consume, which is now controlled by narrowing, self-reinforcing, self-serving media, is screwing the world every day, well before advanced AI happens. So we should worry about it much earlier than other things. And brings me to a book called Brave New World, which I hope most people have read here. Have you? Raise your hands. Okay, a good solid 10%, right? But if not, there are two quintessentially popular books in the world of sci-fi, and one of them is 1984, the other is Brave New World. 1984 somehow seems to be more popular, but it's North Korea and China. Essentially, it's Brave New World, right? It's, an uncle of some kind or the other constantly watching over your actions and therefore what happens when you live in a police state. Brave New World, however, is enormously more sophisticated, right? And it shocks me to know that Huxley understood it at that time, close to 100 years ago. And it posits a thesis that advanced technology will create huge asymmetry in human power and wealth, right? And he says more or less two things which kind of summarize Brave New World. One is that power will accrue to very few and wealth, like Elon Musk, and that vast majority will become entertainment seeking, even though there shall be enormous information available at their disposal, at their fingertips, but they shall always choose what entertains them. So it'll be very easy for the elite to rule the not so elite in a completely otherwise information democratic world, right? So which kind of resets or reframes the question itself that are we really worrying about the wrong things, right? Everything's around us. Human beings are becoming dumber by the day, not because they're intrinsically dumber, but they refuse to participate in this simple activity that all of us were trained for, which is critical thinking. So who's taught critical thinking and where? At MIT? Sure. But everywhere else? Not. So just to kind of wrap up, data protection. Scott McNealy, another person no one probably knows except the older ones here, he was the founder of Sun Microsystems alongside Vinod Khosla, a very well-known venture capitalist now. And Scott McNealy, I remember in the early 2000s, was standing at a Florida conference and grandly announced that privacy is over. Get over it, right? And so that's how much and what he thought of data privacy. And this was in the early 2000s when Netscape was still a thing, for those of you who remember Netscape. So here's something I actually want to know from my co-panelists, right? And Anita brought this up a little bit, which when data is anonymized, other than large scale, and there's so many ways to protect anonymized data using crypto of various kinds, pretty uncrackable crypto. What's the real risk of banding around anonymized data in, essentially unrestricted, which seems to be Europe's main problem, GDPR, right? What's the fuss? Why do we care? And as long as you take out identity, I'll maybe know how many billionaires you got or how many people have cancer in your country. Why is that a problem, right? And I'm illiterate, so co-panelists, please enlighten the audience and me, right? And exclusion of the global south. Let's talk about that for a second. The idea that somehow walls can be built around, around these fortresses protecting rich white nations from their poorer counterparts ignores the bargaining power that accrues from having most of the people elsewhere, and therefore most of the data, right? I am, as an Indian, and no dearth of brilliant people here, as most of us know, not on my deathbed going to send out my data to any other country for them to own and process and give me back processed data, right? So being cloud native, fortunately, has the advantage of technology being leaky. Like, it'll get around, right? There's a set of algorithms training on data, and to the extent that a multinational or somebody who owns serious technology wants to give us, for example, services based on our data, I think there's some negotiation to be done there. Not that easy, right? The other thing to think in advance is, like, let's look at human beings. Show a child a picture of a cat about 3 times, and the child can identify a cat the next 1,000,000 times without problem, right? And that means that there's a template of learning that's inside our head, pre-trained neural network, that is inherited from a single sperm and egg. That template is stored there, right? And AI needs zillions and zillions and zillions of images just to learn to see a cat, okay? Not to mention how humongously power inefficient that is. So the future of AI is not going to look like the present condition of AI. I mean, if AI gets anywhere, far from it, yeah? So all of the questions that we are scurrying around trying to figure out and protect ourselves from, the ravages of AI, are going to be rapidly irrelevant in about 5 to 10 years, simply because I think between quantum, crypto, and AI, we'll have 3 or 4 leaps beyond where current imagination sits right now, which is not to say that the conversation should not start, because later it'll be too late. But I think that we are severely limiting ourselves in the imagination of what's possible if the contemporary completely frames the concerns around which we need to frame policy thinking or action. So,
thank you. So we have 3 very diverse panelists and clearly and strongly expressed views. So I'm going to only try to frame and allow them to engage each other. I think Siddhartha's question is whether the other panelists are working with a specification of what AI is, or is it just metaphorical in the advanced technology sense? I think it's useful clarification. I suppose that we could take the title to be very clear, or we could take the title as requiring some specification. So maybe I'll turn to Anupam first. I mean, if we are at 5 or 10% of what AI may become, do we have a working specification here, or should we just use it as metaphor and as representing certain kinds of technologies?
First, let me begin by asking for another round of applause for Sudhir's Infosys Prize. That's just extraordinary. And it's an honor to have a chance to converse with Sudhir and Anita and Siddharth. And so thank you all for those great comments. First, let me address the question quickly. What is AI is an issue that is that the Biden administration in its AI Bill of Rights says we're not going to define AI. Okay, so they make a decision not to try a definition because they're not creating regulations, and so they don't need to define it. Now, there's another area in which Anita and I both work where there's a central word that is never defined, and that's international trade law, which doesn't define the word services. Services turn out to be extremely elusive to try to define. And so international trade law, since the dawn of trade and services law, which is 1995, has not defined it. And I think it's still managed to be successful. So I am not someone who fetishizes a definition and says, this is a normal conversation in an academic department. What do you mean by that? What does that word mean? I'm not one who thinks it's necessary. Amartya Sen has an incredibly beautiful line in this context where he says, the borders between India and China are disputed, but we still have an idea of what India and China are. Okay, so the AI Act, the European Union's approach, has actually, this is a huge, they have defined it, there's in the draft, but there's a huge controversy over that definition. And so in its current definition, my view is that it means all computer systems. And so the use of software is AI in its current if the way I read it, okay? But in any case, I think that it's a critical question, and I'd love to at some point to respond to everyone else
Sure.
as well.
Sure, we'll just come back to that, but maybe Anita, just a first take on how, when you speak about the potential problems with AI, do you have some particular kind of technology in mind, or is it just an extension of current technologies? I mean, how are you seeing it? Might be useful. Might be a useful clarification. You could take Anupam's route and say, I'm going to avoid definition, but maybe you have some premise that you're working from. Yes.
Surely. I think I'm operating from a kind of a very simple lowest common denominator idea that AI systems make decisions. They correlate ideas, they correlate data points, and then recreate the world. They're deterministic. And therefore, it is really important for a kind of social regulation to be, cast on top of them. So it really doesn't matter whether, we are going to see this trajectory in the form of other kinds of intersection through blockchain or with anything else. The fact is that I think image-based technologies may not go away because their application is now extending to things like the resources that are at the bottom of the oceans. So if you look at the World Economic Forum, it has like Earth Code, Earth Bank of Codes project, which basically means that for personalized medicine tomorrow, you have to start codifying the resources under the bottom of the oceans, right? So, and Big Pharma is gunning for personalized medicine. So it doesn't matter if millions die of tuberculosis. So I do think that there is a certain determinism, economic determinism pre-coded into decision-making, software algorithms in the AI world. And I do think that that hegemonic idea, of course, is there. And around it, of course, we could unsettle many things. So,
sure. I'd come back to you, Siddharth, but maybe because you stated your position on how you'd look at AI quite clearly, which is that there are some new technologies, but this is just an emerging field, and we're very early. And you would, I suspect, give it a tech specification, right? You might say that there's a particular kind of model of software, say machine learning or something like that, which is AI at a particular stage, or you might give a different technical specification. But let me move along then and then ask, and I want to start with Anita on this round, and please feel free to respond to each other in whatever way as the mic gets to you. I just wanted to ask Anita about when I heard you and where you ended up. You were raising concerns and issues that are not new to us. I mean, they're old issues. They're frameworks we understand fairly well. We know that there are distributive questions in the world that we live in. There are, and I'll just try and quickly, we have concerns with egalitarianism. We have concerns with decentralized and autonomous governance systems. We have distribution concerns, and we have them anyway, right? So is there anything new in this story? I mean, because, and the title of this panel invites a new technology and an old framework, human rights. So human rights is another old framework, and I can see someone saying that it really doesn't play well together. But the conclusions you reached were also old frameworks. So are you suggesting simply that there might be both some buzz and some glib talk here about AI, but the old frameworks are robust enough to handle this? Is that where you think you're going, and maybe then we can come around like that?
Thanks so much, Sudhir, for reframing that for me. It shows that I may have been at least partly incoherent, if not wholly. So let me use my second chance. I think that with every resource and its governance, we have to ask the question, why is this resource unique? So if you really look at our common agenda of the UN Secretary General, he's talking about space, and then he's talking about the oceans, and he's talking about many other things. And he talks about data and the digital, right? So there's something different about data, which is at the bottom of all AI, that is not quite like a natural resource, right? Because the depletability, rivalrousness, all of those things, right? What I want to come to is connect your question, if I may, to yours, which is that I think today the problem is that data which is a social commons, and why do I call it a social commons? Because if I did not have everybody, I will not be able to make sense of data science. There is data science because there are people, and we are all basically, I think, completely emancipated, liberated souls. And on top of the data points about our behavior, which is social behavior, is built an economy, right, of AI. Now, I therefore think that the problem is data is actually not going around. The EU health data space is actually an intervention to enable data to go around, because the people who have locked up data, because they are the de facto data holders, they are the de facto neo-feudal landlords who are controlling the resource of data, somehow they have actually peddled this idea that data is not a commons. Now, therefore, the proprietary AI that is sitting on top of anonymized raw data is a resource regime that's completely new. It doesn't have any parallel elsewhere in history. So you might try to apply the forest, analogy, the ocean analogy, but none will stick. You have to understand that the de facto controllers of data are not able to allow data to flow freely, which is why we have a first mover problem. And therefore, I think that and similarly, the free riding problem. If government puts out open data sets, the people who are able to benefit from it are people who already have the technology and the AI to make use of that open data. Seldom do startups, I mean, if Twitter could be sold to Elon Musk, small startups are always cannibalized, right? So in some sense, I think we are confronted with a new resource which doesn't have a governance regime. And therefore, in order to talk about it, we have to not go back to fashionable and glib ideas only of consent and privacy. We have to root it back in older ideas of justice, and perhaps, going back to what you said, have a shared idea of what it can be, a common idea of what it can be, even without having to necessarily infuse it with a definitive meaning. And there, I think, as a society, as a global society, we have to move. And we have to recognize that a certain layer of the data resource for AI to be built in innumerable ways that challenge the hegemonic AI model, that layer of data resource, which is a commons, has to be released.
Okay, that's interesting. So Anita ended up emphasizing the movement of data rather than the data protection side, which I agree, at least in the healthcare space, has some interesting implications. But Siddharth, I wanted to come back to you to ask about this question of newness and oldness, right? So, I mean, would you still hold to the idea? I mean, I thought I heard you say that there's enough new in the AI space that we can overcome some of the older problems that previous technological or industrial paradigms might have had. I don't know that I heard that right, but maybe there is something there. There is some of that potential. Certainly, evangelists in the space would push that view. Is that where you would end up, or do you think that the concerns that other panelists are raising, whether they be the concerns of a colonialism framework or a global South framework, that we should really move away from these frameworks? That there's something else that was the sense I got from you. And maybe, I don't know whether you think the distributive justice framework is also not the right frame. So I'm just going to try and push you. I know that in the technology sector, and I'm sure many of the audience and certainly the panelists are familiar with the alternative normative frameworks for AI, right? Some fate framework or something like that. Is that where you would go in your thinking about regulation here?
First, I suffer from the typical myopia of a techie, even though I myself am not a techie. So the way I see the universe is people who frame policy don't think at the same level of detail as somebody who is a techie does. For example, I go from instance specific to general, and that's how I create a generalized view of at least my own private world. Whereas a lot of the world I know creates a vague idea of the general and then struggles to come up with, let's say, lettered laws that instantiate the general into something specific. And and if I lost everybody in what I just said, like policies are stated as broad principles, and then large committees sit down and list down what that actually means or is supposed to mean, then that gets codified or proposed into law. Those laws achieve certain things, don't achieve certain things. Big difference happens between what the vision was for articulating a particular policy framework and how it's realized, right? So I jumped straight into the meat and I said, okay, what are we really talking about, right? And so in this case, a lot of what you said, actually, I didn't even understand. Okay, so for me, the way I see it, it's extraordinarily simple, right? That at least simple to understand, which means that Europe or anyone else, let's take medicine or personalized medicine or any kind of medicine, you can't treat Indian people with AIs that's trained on, let's say, German data. Just cannot, right? And so therefore, to be able to use natively trained German AI on Indian people, you'll need data from Indian people, which I earlier said ain't happening, that there's some negotiation to happen there. If at all such hegemonic ownership of AI is even possible, I argue that it's not, simply because the tools and techniques used for AI are not specifically capital intensive in the same way, for example, that large machinery like a fighter jet is, right? One single fighter jet could cost anywhere between $250 million to $1 billion and have specific secret IP that the Americans will never sell to us. So be it. AI, however, at this very moment, most of AI research is in some vague form public. Even Google tends to publish its research, right? So any sufficiently smart person could make some sense of it. And there are enough sufficiently smart people in Eastern Europe, in India, in Latin America, right? Teeny tiny problem is the price of compute. That even if you were to write a bunch of models, you can't rustle up the wealth as private companies or a single educational institution to run these models. So in somewhat of a radical departure from what we are really talking about, I'd say that there are internal mechanisms available to nation states to almost, war against this idea that AI can be cloistered, and which is that centralize your resources in a way and make them public that makes AI research available to everyone, right? And for example, the government of India, like with most of the things that it does, sees AI as a toilet transformation mission, right? Take $1 billion and spread it out among all universities, which achieves precisely nothing, right? If you're trying to create a huge compute center to make that kind of compute power available to people, like a supercomputer, to train AI algorithms at the highest level, by all means, please concentrate your whatever you can afford into one place, and then distribute it out as timeshare to people who want to use it, right? That would help create antidotes to what we are talking about here, right? Data, yes, I don't worry about it. We have most of the data, right? To the extent that it is population, a lot of the data is population-centric, and every nation has it. I wonder, for example, as medicine, where there is a lot of this fear that data will exclude, any fancy modeling system is completely useless without the population data to act on it. So multiple things need to happen for hegemonic concentration of power in the world of AI. And one is that China, America, and the others will need to race so far ahead of others like us in very specific implementations of AI that we will be beholden to those nations in order to access some of it. And the form of being beholden will require us to share a lot of data from here to there. Now, that beholdenness gets tempered by many other geopolitical considerations. For example, our proximity to China, therefore our rising importance in this area of the world to America, for instance, and now whatever is emerging in Asia. So I think that it's complex. I think the leverage that nations like India, for example, have in the world will depend on a lot of things to see the realization of some kind of this unipolarity in AI power. I don't think it'll happen as easily. There are, however, larger questions, not so much about nation states and global north-south, which have plagued industrial development in general. Disenfranchisement, right? Automation as a general idea. Obviously, sort of population level biases, of various applications as deployed even within nation states, right? So we have known, despite protestations of every economic expert, McKinsey and Company and others to the contrary, that once there is disenfranchisement of poor, untrained people, they do not get readily retrained to do other things. Just doesn't happen, right? So which means that another wave of unemployment created by autonomous technologies doing what were otherwise considered difficult to do by anybody other than a human being, such as form filling or accounting, will create a wave of unemployment which will render all of these people unemployed and jobless with nowhere to go. And that to me is worrisome.
Hence Huxley and the Brave New World. I'm going to come back to you, Anupam. I think that other panelists have had a chance to have a take on the global south, on whether nation-state paradigms are the paradigms that we should go at these questions at, the decolonization frame, and so on and so forth. And you've not had a chance to respond. But while you're at it, you tantalizingly dropped an Imagine 2032 and Imagine 2075, if I've got the dates right. So you didn't tell us where you wanted to go with that. So maybe there's an opportunity to sketch some of that. Yes, please.
Thank you. So let me quickly walk back through some of the great comments of Anita and Siddharth and just kind of pick up on, just touch on a couple things quickly. So I agree. So the Sewa example where Sewa puts up, agrees with a foreign e-commerce platform to make its goods available that are produced by collectives of women, and it turns out they don't have any takers. And as Anita says, this could be due to that algorithm not sufficiently promoting this within the search engine of that system. And so here I absolutely agree that if a government is keen on this kind of promotion, micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, women-owned enterprises, it can mandate these things, it can encourage these things. There's nothing wrong about that. So that is, it can say to a foreign platform, as it can say to a domestic platform, hey, let's make sure the algorithms are promoting this. I don't think they can ensure sales. That's, but I think there could be pressure put on companies to do all those things. And I actually, if I were the Indian government or the government of Bangladesh or Pakistan or Namibia, I would be asking global platforms, hey, give me the statistics of what's happening within the ecosystem in my jurisdiction, and get me the data and show me what you're contributing to our welfare. I think that's a totally reasonable demand. Siddharth, I want to just a couple things. I want to +1 the anonymization. So my colleague Paul Ohm is the world leader on stuff can be de-anonymized. But here's the thing: stuff can be de-anonymized, but to some extent, to a limited extent. but it's often very costly to de-anonymize it. And so it really, I want to make sure that when we're regulating, we're not regulating for some remote possibility. We're regulating with the reasonable things that are likely to happen, largely in mind. Of course, we worry about the tail risks and things like that. But I think the kind of anonymization is always unsuccessful. It can always be de-anonymized. Therefore, anonymization is useless. That framework really doesn't get us to the European health space, so one of the reasons, so it's not just proprietary, hey, I want this data myself, and I want to, it's also, hey, if I share this data, will someone then claim that I've now de-anonymized the data and you've now revealed information about one of your patients? The Google DeepMind contract with the NHS should come to mind for those following this exact question. There's reasons that European health data space, it's complicated by European data protection law, not just the proprietary interests of these things. And largely, these kinds of things are trying to encourage this, but not exactly mandating it because of data protection concerns. Third, echo chambers. I just want to, everyone seemed to agree that echo chambers are the problem of the internet. The pre-internet world was full of echo chambers. They were your family, they were your friends, they were the limited information that was available to you. The internet did not create echo chambers in its own way. In fact, it turns out that there are a lot of people who are interested in lots of different views, say on Twitter. And so the social science research on this, echo chambers, is Cass Sunstein, and Nicholas Negroponte invention. And the social science on echo chambers is really largely not with the internet promotes echo chambers framing. In fact, that is itself an echo chamber of that norm. That meme is part of an echo chamber of like-minded people saying like-minded things. And so the internet is full of diversity of voices. But I really also did appreciate Sudhar's point that Fox News or News Corp, one of the great menaces of the world, has tremendously, created this very kind of echo chamber world, and so there are lots of things that predate the internet, and so I want to point that out. Finally, and I'll end on this. I want to make sure that when Siddhartha is saying crypto, you recognize that you hear him as saying cryptography, not blockchain. Right, that's the way I hear it. So just FYI. So crypto here means cryptography, and the importance of cryptography to lots and lots of different privacy-enhancing efforts, etc. So I'll leave it at that.
Your scenarios?
Oh, scenarios. Okay. Oh, so I was just trying not to go on too long. So let's begin with the Mechanical Turk. I think the Mechanical Turk, as you may know, was as the image showed, a kind of construction where there was an automaton. So Europe at this time was abuzz with automata. Really elaborate mechanical devices. And so this was supposed to be an autonomous chess-playing robot. And it turned out, of course, that there was a human being in the mechanism. And so the idea that the person was Turkish or something like that, I'm not sure. The invention was in Austria. And so my question really the provocation there is, what are we trying to get at with the AI Civil Rights Act? Is it the discrimination that the system does because it's AI? Is it just the fact that there's discrimination? So if a human did it, would we feel better about it? And that's there may be reasons to think that the AI system is actually more pernicious, et cetera. There are reasons to think that, but I want to make sure that we've thought hard about those questions when we're trying to figure this out. So I'll leave that provocation. The second one is this possibility of a ministry for AI. I've in a variety of papers been concerned with I think government regulation of the internet is essential and critical. I think there are lots of bad things that happen without regulation. See blockchain systems that are ripping people off left and right because they're not properly regulated. And so I think all of that is a huge, huge thing. But I also think that the internet does have this power. The control of the internet is incredible power. And so once you have a government that now controls all the corporations, the combination of corporate power now amassed in a single government's hands becomes worrisome. And so I think the regulation systems need to have checks and balances so that we have independent bodies. We depoliticize that regulation as much as possible so that the executive can't make sure that the AI is doing its bidding, which is always going to be to entrench that executive for forever. So I think that we want to make sure that when we build these regulations, that we put in checks and balances, that there are judicial processes, there are independent processes. We depoliticize the decisions.
Thanks, Anupam. I think we, in the tradition of most BIC panels, let me invite 2 audience questions and only 2 as we run down the clock. So I'll just look around. Yes, please. And you'll just need to come up and there's a mic up front, and that's one. And is there a second? Anyone? Let me look for some. Yes. Right up in front, 3rd row. Yes. Please come up and you can get your questions in turn. Yes. Just introduce yourself and please.
Sure. Hi. My name is Siddharth, and I'm a researcher on AI and data systems regulation ethics. Thanks for the excellent panel discussion, by the way. My question, and possibly, a case in favor of AI by extrapolation, is that I was wondering if maybe there could be a case for maybe just putting in place, an axiom such as all AI should in fact lead to greater social harmony, or another social end or end of social good of your choosing, because I think one of the positives of AI that might be overlooked is in fact precisely what you spoke about, which is to actually reflect the biases or the echo chambers or the injustices that we already have operating through analog networks, right? So for example, if you actually look at the patterns and the choices that people make, you'd find those sexist biases, you'd find those casteist biases in what people actually choose every day. And I was wondering if that could be the case for AI, and you could actually make this case for like beneficial or trustworthy AI. Yeah.
Interesting. Yes.
Hi, my name is Kritika and I'm a human rights lawyer. My question is very short. How do you reconcile the obvious need to regulate, say, AI and the data, and an instance where the entity or the state that's supposed to regulate is fundamentally illiberal or undemocratic? So how do you balance this tension? Thank you.
Let me start. I don't know if Siddharth wants to go at either question on the panel. Siddharth first, and we'll work our way.
So first question, let's start with an example. Like for example, AI working on an applications process, university application, not here in India, but in the US, because we do entrance exams here, so no problem. There you have subjective applications and possibly a picture of an applicant, and unknowingly AI trained on successful applications versus unsuccessful applications might conclude that white men with broad foreheads tend to write better essays than short Indian men, whatever. But so there's, in other words, room for bias, right? And however, let's say in personal medicine, when you're trying to look at treatment that is specific to a particular kind of gene pool, so which could be black men from Costa Rica, for example, it is appropriate for those algorithms to be trained on the relevant population or tribe, right? Hence, thoughtless regulation can in fact be harmful. And in my earlier rather extended remark, I said that policy that is informed without or created without knowledge or is not informed by the specifics tends often to be poor policy, reactive, retrograde, reactionary, all these words, right? And so the axiomatic principle, perhaps enforced retrospectively, by some kind of an audit, might be a more useful route. Like, if it is incumbent on the creators of algorithms, and not just AI, by the way, all algorithms, because anything that you're encoding as a human being is subject to the exact same biases that an AI trained on. The only problem with AI is trained on data, so all the biases inherent in data are imported automatically into the AI that's trained on data. That's the only real thing that's of significance here. So when we are encoding with our heads, we are also encoding all our biases into the rule systems that we encode into computers. And which means such sort of cautionary directives as operating principles or guiding principles for creating algorithms are appropriate. And then how do you run checks and balances to ensure that such principles are in fact obeyed? I don't know how to do that, but I think the idea seems sound, right? And for the second question, I just have to say that it's not by any means obvious that data and AI should be regulated or how they should be regulated. I think it needs to be carefully thought through. A hammer brought out on a widely distributed technology, which is widely applicable with such varied context that cannot be imagined readily, is easy to screw up. So, which doesn't, however, exonerate us from the need to sort of pursue and think about regulation systematically. Nonetheless, it's non-obvious. And as to non-democratic, nation states doing the regulating, I think that's a bit of an irony. I don't know.
Anita?
Thank you. So, yes, I think the axiom obviously works because it's like saying we all desire a society where there's, justice, equality, dignity, fraternity, etc. I agree that the institutions obviously have to be independent, and that is really the elephant in the room. But I also want to say that the question today for me, particularly in AI, is not only the question about misrecognition and exclusion and discrimination. I think the question for me is how is value that resides in data as a resource being distributed through particular regimes of AI that are controlled by particular entities. And in this regard, mostly corporate entities, primarily from 2 countries. The control that China has, 10 years ago, China in global trade negotiations would say, we want data localization. 10 years hence, today, when its IoT empire is expanding through its manufacturing presence in different parts of the world, including Africa, it's gunning for data flows, right? So when the situation changes and wealth concentration appears, people's politics change. So I think we have to be very careful that when axioms are situated, we don't only, because the most evident and evocative thing about AI is discrimination. Data sets are really doing things to caste, gender, etc., which is very important. But I think the questions of whether we are generating public value out of AI is an important question. I also want to go back to what you said about data availability. According to our research and what I have read, the data that is available today in India, for instance, in agriculture, is non-existent. There is some data with institutions, but most of the data that AI players use is really superficial data to target loans, fintech, etc., at very, very, farmers at the bottom of the pyramid. It's reverse redlining. It's actually targeting people to extract, and that is not upstream uses of AI in agriculture, which will help you, for instance, decide the price, the quality of millets, etc., which means running a millet innumerable times through the imaging software that will then enable the machine to recognize what is good millet, right? So all these, the question here in India, therefore, is all the downstream uses of AI is where venture capital investment comes, because you can mop up, the market with very poor people just becoming sources of data extraction and hence wealth extraction. Now, for me, I think the second question I have and to conclude the first, I think the question today for me is public value being generated from the AI economy? And the answer is a resounding no. And we have to generate public value. And for that, we have to, sorry to use the word if it's unpopular, we have to socialize data. So if we don't do that, we are not going to end up creating public value. And then, and this is not like all data, but of course a layer of data. So coming to the second one, I just want to pose a counterintuitive question. If you read the recommendations algorithm law of China, yesterday I was in I was attending an online webinar, which was a closed-door webinar, where Chinese scholars were talking about AI regulation in China, and someone who's an American scholar of China said that nowhere in the planet is a recommendation algorithm guideline directive as emancipatory and as wonderful for workers as it is in the Chinese recommendation algorithm guidelines. For instance, also consumers, according to that, if you're a consumer in China, you could ask a company to tell you what are the tags they are using to classify you. And nowhere in the planet does that exist. So, of course, I'm no fan of China or India. And I have to say that again. But I have to say that simplistic correlations between illiberal regimes and their visions of democracy, including economic democracy, should be avoided, because it's not as if the liberal democracies of the world have a very, very just view of a fair global economy.
Yeah. Anupam.
Can I ask Anita one extra question?
At dinner. So, Anupam, please.
So thank you to the questioners. First, quickly, the AI axiom, I don't think it works unless you have a positronic brain. Asimov had a deus ex machina that allowed the, he had a general intelligence. So I don't think that works at all. So, okay, so that's truly science fiction. That's, far outside. We're always told that is coming, and it's always 20 years away. So it's been 20 years away for the last 50 years, right? Okay, so the critica with the question about illiberal states that are regulating these systems, that is a concern. And I'm not concerned about illiberal states alone. I'm concerned about liberal states. Okay, so I don't know, if people are paying attention. There are a lot of authoritarian or governments which are coming into democratic states, and so traditionally democratic states. So I think this is a concern that we should have for every state. So I'm not only concerned about illiberal states here. I think the concentration of power that the internet that government control of what the data that companies have gives is just very, very frightening. And so I do believe in government control. So I'm going to, again, but that has to be, all the checks and balances, it has to be depoliticized, it has to be, et cetera. So I don't mean government control as in this executive's control over what every corporation in the country is doing with data. And that's a problem. Quickly on a comment that Anita made about the recommendation algorithms guidelines in China. I will ask. I've done this with European audience. Put up on the board a quote or an article from that recommendation algorithms rule. And people will not ever guess that and ask what country has this law, has this as a guideline. No one will ever guess it's China. So I actually do agree entirely with Anita that we can learn from China, we can learn from everywhere. I would, I think you should all be expert in Chinese law because, it's actually super important. And so now, I disagree with her on kind of all data or whatever, we should socialize data, et cetera. I'm not, so let me go back to the targeting loans to farmers, for example. Nothing that she said about companies targeting loans to farmers based on AI none of it makes me react with a desire to shut it down. Why? Because the alternative is not some benevolent moneylender. So instead, I just want to regulate. I want to make sure this isn't a lawless land. This isn't the crypto as in blockchain land. I think we need financial regulations, but credit systems that predated AI systems were shit also. And so, so we want to make sure that we have better approaches, and AI isn't inherently dehumanizing the credit score systems that we had before, the assessment of your caste and your class and all those things that were before by the human being sitting in front of you. None of that was great either. So I think we should regulate, but not just reject these systems. So in all these cases, I want you to think about not some imagined perfection that existed in the 1990s or some pre-internet era, because the world was never perfect. There was no golden age. And so of great equality and freedom that the internet has wrested away from us. In fact, I think we should always continue to say, can we make these technologies more egalitarian? And I totally agree with that axiom. Can we use these technologies to make the world better? And can we do that across the world so that the technologies, the smartphones, all these incredible computing powers that are in Silicon Valley can be used in a village in Bangladesh or in Namibia. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Anupam, for both starting us off this evening and getting us home. So may I first thank the audience for your patience and participation, and then invite all of you to thank our panelists for the spirited evening of discussion. Thank you. Thanks.